Welcome to Making the Grade. Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle Edmonds from Idaho News 6. So glad you could join us on this Tuesday morning here live on Facebook, where we talk about everything related to education in the state of Idaho. Joining me, as he always does, is Kevin Richert from Idaho Education News. Hello, Kev. How are you?
Hi, Michelle. How are you doing?
Good, good. Busy time for everybody, it seems like. And the
Definitely
education
is.
world just keeps on churning. And especially when it comes to the legislature being in town, we have so much to get to. Kevin, first and foremost, though, of course, we always love to hear people's comments and questions, thoughts as we go through our talking through the stories that have been the headlines at Idaho Education News over the last week or so. I think the place we have to start, right, is vaccines.
Sure.
The governor has announced that teachers and school staff, we're talking pre-K through the public school system, the 12th grade, and not just public school, I should say that, private as well. But those teachers and school staff can get the vaccine essentially immediately, which was a change from the original thought that had come out. So what are you hearing? And teachers, if you're out there, school staff, are you getting the vaccine? Have you gotten it? I'm just curious where people stand on this.
Well, it is moving very quickly. And that development came on Tuesday with the announcement that K-12 teachers and staff were eligible to receive the vaccine. So we're in this group of folks like educators, K-12 educators, first responders, law enforcement, corrections officials. Those are the folks who are in this next wave of vaccines. And yes, it is moving pretty quickly. And, just anecdotally, as I look on my Facebook feed, teachers that I know socially or professionally, a number of them have posted their little cards showing that they got their first vaccine. So folks are responding pretty quickly. I don't think we'll ever really get a sense of what sort of opt-out rates we see in the schools, any more than we'll get any really good sense of what kind of opt-outs we see in the healthcare community. I mean, we know nationally there have been reports that the opt-out rate in the healthcare community has been high in areas of the nation. But I don't think we'll ever really get clear answers in Idaho about that or about educators. But in the anecdotal sense, yeah, what I'm noticing from the teaching community is people are getting in there and getting their first vaccines.
That's what I wanted to know, Kevin. Have you seen or heard from either the state level or the local level from the districts, anybody either requiring their teachers to get a vaccine or showing proof of it, or is that absolutely taboo in the HIPAA laws?
I don't know at this point of any districts that are requiring the vaccine. That's not to say that there aren't any. I just don't know, and that's something we're looking into. And a requirement of the vaccine, I don't know with the scarcity of supply if a district or a school would want to require it at this point. So I don't really know. To your question, I don't know if there are required vaccines in any of the school districts.
Well, if you're out there listening to us, we'd love, obviously, to get your views. If you're a teacher or a school staff member, hearing what's coming from your local district.
And we're trying to reach out to teachers who have gotten their vaccine, who are excited about getting the vaccine, who are jumping on the opportunity. But we also want to hear from educators who are waiting, who are opting out.
Let's take a step back, Kevin. Why did Governor Little decide to go this route and try and make sure that teachers and school staff would be among the first to get the vaccine?
Well, as you know, the governor has been talking for months about the importance of trying to keep schools open, of trying to maintain face-to-face learning. So I think he views getting educators access to the vaccine, getting teachers, getting educators vaccinated is a key step towards keeping schools open and keeping schools open safely. So it was not a surprise. And it wasn't really even a surprise that teachers were fairly early on in the pecking order in terms of vaccines. We knew that going into it. We knew that in the fall that the rollout schedule had teachers coming in fairly early on the schedule. We just didn't realize how early that startup date would be. Originally, it looked like maybe it was going to be February. Obviously, it moved up into mid-January. So, the schedule is obviously very fluid, and a lot of it we're still trying to figure out the rest of. Idahoans over the age of 65 are still waiting to get their turn on the vaccine. February 1st is when people over 65 can start to get the vaccine. There are other classes of employees that will fit in here somewhere down the road. So, there's a lot still to unfold. And, no secret that there have been problems with vaccine availability, that there have been problems with the rollout of the vaccine just because of the distributions. So, we're still working our way through this.
I don't know if you know the answer to this, Kevin. You and I did not discuss this. Has Idaho Education News heard at all about what is happening when it comes to educators in other states and the vaccine, and where Idaho stands in terms of a quick rollout of this vaccine to teachers?
I can't tell you how many states, but I can definitely tell you that Idaho is not unique, that there are other states that have moved teachers in fairly quickly in terms of the vaccine rollout, probably for a lot of the same reasons that Idaho has moved teachers and educators into the vaccine schedule. But I should note, and I think it's worth keeping this in mind, we're talking about K-12 educators. We're talking about K-12 staff. At this point, there's no plan to move higher education staff or faculty into the schedule, into any kind of accelerated schedule. So, college employees, college professors, and students are still pretty much on hold. We don't know exactly when the coronavirus vaccine will be available on campuses.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I think it's a really good question. I don't know how you draw the distinction or why you're drawing the distinction between K-12 and higher education. I just know that as we've listened to the governor since really the spring, he's really emphasized the importance of having K-12 schools open and having kids in classrooms, talking mostly about K-12, not as much with higher education.
And how important that face-to-face learning is, which
Yeah.
we all know that in college and university settings, students, even before the pandemic, were doing some remote learning. So maybe there's something to that.
We also know that for some college students, we shouldn't assume that all college students can, transfer and, transition seamlessly into online learning. There are students who just don't respond well to online learning. It doesn't really matter whether we're talking about K-12 students or college students.
At Idaho Education News, you have done an excellent job of tracking coronavirus cases when it comes to the schools. Let's do a quick update, since we're talking vaccines and literally some light at the end of what has been a very long tunnel for the education world and the rest of us. But what are we looking at when it came to K-12 coronavirus cases and what you've been seeing? Of course, we have to admit that we're coming off a long holiday break as well.
Right. And that's been kind of interesting to watch, not just with K-12, but with the case numbers in general. We know now that we're almost 3 weeks now from Christmas, and there was a lot of concern, probably is still concern, that we're going to see a spike in cases based on Christmas travel, based on holiday visiting, on holiday plans. Well, we did not see that this week in the latest round of numbers from the K-12 system. Now, I want to note that when we're looking at these numbers, we're looking at sort of a narrow window. These are numbers that were released on Friday. They were released early because of Monday's holiday. So it's only 5 days worth of data as opposed to what we've been seeing in the past, which is 7 days worth of data. How much does that factor into this lower number that we saw this week? That's hard to tell, but I've got to think that it's a factor. But what we're also seeing, really, when I track the overall state numbers, those case numbers are starting to slow down a little bit. We're still seeing about 1,000 cases a day, give or take, on most weekdays. But we're not seeing those 2,000 new cases per day like we were seeing in November and December. So the numbers right now are slowing down, or have slowed down for the past couple of weeks, even though we're a couple of weeks removed from Christmas and the holidays, and we're a couple of weeks removed from this bubble where health officials were concerned that we were going to see a surge in cases, from the holiday season. So right now, the case numbers are starting to slow down, or have slowed down a little bit, the new case numbers. Whether that's a long-term trend still remains to be seen, but after some of the numbers we were seeing, 2,000 cases a day statewide, 500 cases in the K-12 system in 1 week back in November, I want to say. Any kind of decrease in the new caseload, it's got to be good news. We'll just see if it's a trend or if it's a blip.
What about when it comes to college campuses? Again, we're looking at numbers that don't necessarily reflect an accurate portrayal, in the sense that many students left for a few weeks, even perhaps more than that, if they decided to go home when the Thanksgiving break happened and not return to campus until the new semester started, perhaps. But what are you seeing in those trends?
Too early to say what we're going to see in terms of the spring numbers on the campuses. Seeing pretty wide variation right now. BYU Idaho over in Rexburg reported something about 70 active cases on campus earlier this week. That's by far the highest number we're seeing on any of the campuses. I think we're seeing a couple dozen to 40 some cases. Yeah, okay, here we go. Boise State had 45 cases last week. I think we're going to want to follow this, and we will follow this every week to see what the numbers do as the semester unfolds. This is sort of your snapshot as students are coming back to school, as students are getting tested. We'll watch and see what happens again a couple of weeks down the road. Because now you've got students back on campuses. They are together in classrooms. They are together in residence halls. They are together on the campus. So we'll see if there's any kind of spread, if there's any kind of outbreak that occurs on the campuses.
These hot topics, Kevin, as we well know, are transferring over into the legislature, which is now at full steam ahead, shall we say, for the middle of January. And already there is a public gatherings limit challenge. The governor had put a public limit of 10 people on gatherings, and he then released that slightly when it came to school sporting events, so that each athlete, each participant could have 2 people viewing that sports. But now NAMBLA lawmaker Brent Crane is trying to kind of go around the governor here. So talk about this House committee resolution and where it stands.
Yeah, let's talk about this resolution first, and then I'll try to take a step back and put it into a broader perspective. So what Representative Crane is talking about is he wants to rescind the language in the governor's coronavirus order that pertains to the size of public gatherings. Right now, that cap for most public gatherings is 10 people. Now, there are exceptions. Religious gatherings are exempt, political gatherings are exempt, but most public gatherings are limited to 10 people. And as you said, the governor did roll that back a little bit in terms of sporting events, to where now athletes are allowed to invite 2 people to attend an athletic event. So every athlete gets 2 people that they get to invite. What Representative Crane wants to do, and what the House committee almost unanimously approved on Monday, was a resolution that would get rid of that language. And sporting events were the focal point of the debate. That was the focal point of the discussion on Monday. You had a couple of student athletes from Hillcrest High School over in eastern Idaho in the Idaho Falls area came to testify in favor of the resolution. That said, we're student leaders, we're in student government, we're also student athletes, and we feel like we need to get this back into schools. We need to allow students to attend athletic events again, because morale, camaraderie, is really suffering as students are forced to not attend athletic events. So this is all part of a much bigger debate that's unfolding at the legislature. There's a lot of push and pull right now between the legislative branch and the executive branch. There's a lot of unrest within the legislature about what has transpired in response to the coronavirus pandemic, whether we're talking about, in this case, talking about limits on public gatherings. There's concern about the emergency declaration, which the governor issued in March and remains in effect. I just came out of watching an hour and a half debate in a Senate committee about a resolution that would get rid of the emergency declaration. And we're going to see a bunch of bills. Senate Pro Tem Chuck Winder said, expect maybe 6 to 8 more pieces of legislation that we haven't seen yet, all in response to the coronavirus emergency declaration and where the state goes from here and what is the legislature's role in this debate as opposed to the governor's role in this debate. This is going to be the defining issue of this 2021 session, I believe.
Kevin, give some people a little bit of a political lesson here, me included. What happens with the House committee passing this challenge? What kind of weight does it hold?
That's a really good question. So here's the situation with emergency declarations and the legislature's role. So you have bills and you have concurrent resolutions. Stick with me, folks. This is your civics lesson, whether you wanted it or not. So a bill has to pass both houses, and then it has to go to the governor, and the governor can sign it or veto it. A concurrent resolution does not have to go to the governor's desk. So what we're talking about with Brent Crane's proposal and what we're talking about with the resolution that I mentioned before that the Senate committee looked at today to get rid of the emergency declaration, those are concurrent resolutions. The difference being that if these resolutions pass both houses, that's it. They don't go to the governor. The governor doesn't have the chance to veto it, doesn't have any role in it whatsoever. But, and here's where it gets sticky, and here's kind of the legal gray area in my view. Under state law, the legislature can rescind an emergency declaration through concurrent resolution. So what you saw the Senate working on this morning that would get rid of the emergency declaration, that's laid out in state code. That's the mechanism by which the legislature can come in and say, we're getting rid of this emergency declaration. How Representative Crane's resolution dealing with one aspect of the emergency declaration, how that works, and if that then vetoes or gets rid of that section of the emergency declaration, I'm not exactly sure how that works legally. Normally, concurrent resolutions are kind of these non-binding statements of the legislature. These, I think, may have some more teeth to them.
I'll just be curious to see how this all plays out.
Yeah, again, I think that this has been brewing since March, and I think we saw a flavor of it in August when the legislature gathered and talked about getting rid of the emergency declaration. There was actually a resolution that passed the House in August to get rid of the emergency declaration. It didn't go anywhere in the Senate, but the Senate then came back with something that said, we're going to look at this and we are going to get rid of the emergency declaration in 2021. That was kind of the Senate's statement of purpose. And you're seeing both houses moving very quickly. We're barely a week into the legislative session and you've got bills and resolutions already in the hopper and more to come. This, like I say, I think this is going to be the issue of the session. Even in a session where you've got all this surplus money to sort out. Normally a $600 million surplus would be the story of a legislative session. I think this tension between the legislature and the governor, I think that's going to be the issue this year.
We'll continue to watch it, especially when it spikes into education as well. Mm-hmm. Kevin, I want to get to a piece that you wrote on dual credit. And I really found this story fascinating because, as we know from Governor Brad Little's State of the State and budget address, he is really putting a push on making sure that high school students have more money and ability to take dual credit classes, meaning pushing them into doing upper level work, college level work while still in high school. In fact, he's putting another almost $10 million into this program. You took a deep dive to look at the numbers and maybe even see if that's a good idea or not. What did you come up with?
Well, you're right. The governor wants to put $9.5 million of additional state money into the Advanced Opportunities program. And Advanced Opportunities is this program that pays for a lot of programs. It pays for a lot of options for students. Every student gets this $4,100 $4,125 line of credit that they can spend on any number of things, including dual credit classes. They can take college level courses while in high school for free. The state covers it. And as you can see from the graphic, the number of students who have been doing dual credit, the number just skyrocketed for several years. Those teal lines on that chart just zoomed up over the course of the past few years. We don't know what the numbers are for this school year. I would expect them to be lower. And what the colleges have already reported is that they've seen fewer students signing up for dual credit classes. So we know that the numbers dropped for a variety of reasons that have to do with the pandemic. The big question, and this is where this $9.5 million request gets interesting, is are you expecting the interest in dual credit to come back as school returns to something more like normal, as the pandemic starts to wane? Governor Little believes that what we're seeing right now is a blip. A lot of educators are with him on this and saying, yeah, the enrollment is going to come back as soon as high school students can get access, can work it into their schedules. High school students will come back to dual credit classes. They're going to take these free dual credit classes. And if anything, it's possible there may just be kind of pent up demand as students can start to schedule these classes again and work them into their routines. So the $9.5 million kind of backfills the budget. It makes up for some money that the state had to take out of reserve to cover this program in past years. And it builds in additional money with the anticipation that there's going to be additional demand. So we're paying $20 million a year right now into this program. The governor wants to turn that into $29.5 million. That has to work its way through the legislature, of course. This has been a pretty popular program at the State House for several years. So you would think that the odds are pretty good that legislators will buy in and support this proposal.
Well, and maybe whether it's political or not, it is good to propose this in a year with a massive surplus.
Yes, and what is interesting, though, with the governor's proposal in education in general, the money that he is looking at putting into education, he's kind of playing the hits here. He's going back to programs that he has pushed for in the past, that even Governor Otter pushed for in his time. Whether we're talking about Advanced Opportunities, which was a program that went into effect before Governor Little took office, the Career Ladder, which was another Butch Otter initiative that Governor Little has picked up on in his time as governor. Literacy, which has been Governor Little's big push, really doubling down on some programs and some a commitment in literacy that went back to Governor Otter's time in office. These are familiar initiatives. These are initiatives that the legislature has approved in the past, has endorsed in the past. So Governor Little didn't really break any new ground in terms of education initiatives this year, but dual credit is another example of a program that he'd like to see some more money going into because he feels like there's an unmet need.
It is early on in the legislature, but are you getting any read from any lawmakers yet, Kevin, you and the folks at Idaho Education News, about whether or not the education budget is going to sail through as in years past?
Well, let's talk about that more next week because we'll get a much better sense, because next week is Education Week at the legislature. And what that means is that's the week that the college and university presidents go before the budget committee. That's the week when State Superintendent Sherry Ibarra makes her budget presentation. So all week at JFAC, you're going to have education presentations, and it starts first thing Monday morning. You've got the university presidents, the college presidents. You've got Superintendent Ibarra on Thursday of next week. So even by next Tuesday when we get together, we'll at least have a sense of how it's going so far with the colleges and universities.
I'll be fascinated about that too, considering that higher education has not seen in the budget requests over the last few years, and including this year, as much money as they would have liked to have seen.
No, and we've seen a lot more controversy, and we've seen a lot more debate and pushback over the higher education budget that we've seen in past years. And I'm going to be really interested to see if that continues this year, especially, in light of what we saw last week. The presidents of the 3 universities came out last Wednesday and said, we will freeze tuition for 1 more year if the legislature approves Governor Little's budget request. Really interesting political play here by the presidents. And I'll really be fascinated to see how legislators respond if they see that as sort of an offer by the presidents to hold the line on tuition to try to address affordability issues, or if some legislators will be taken aback by it and feel like, well, no, we're not playing let's make a deal here. We're going to pass the budget that we feel is appropriate. It took 3 tries to get a higher education budget through the House of Representatives last year. I think it's going to be even tougher this year because I think, if anything, the House is more conservative than it was in 2020 because of the election results. So higher ed's going to be a fascinating budget to watch.
Well, on that note, and before I let you go for making the grade, I have to officially congratulate you, my friend, because hats off to you. If you have not heard, everybody, Kevin has received yet another national fellowship. And I just need you to explain to people what this means. But I know personally as a journalist that this is a huge deal. And I'm so excited for you because you're going to get to continue to follow your passion and study more about higher education, and not only study it, but report back to us on it. So congratulations, Kevin.
Thank you. Thank you. This is a fellowship from Education Writers Association. That's a national organization that supports education writers across the country. This is my 2nd fellowship with EWA. It's Idaho Ed News' 3rd fellowship through EWA. Our Sammy Edge, working with Nicole Foy from The Statesman, they had a fellowship last year looking at Latino student issues. My project this year is going to be looking at higher education enrollment. We know the numbers dropped, and we know the numbers dropped in some really important demographics. First-generation students, first-time students, recent high school graduates. We saw mixed numbers in the Latino community. I want to take a look at those enrollment numbers and those enrollment trends and try to determine, is it a pandemic phenomenon or is it a continuation of a bigger problem in terms of higher education enrollment? So with EWA's help, we're going to take a look at this twice during 21. I'll do a package of stories towards the end of the spring, towards the end of this academic year, and look at what happened this year. And then we'll come back in the fall of 2021 when we get those fall enrollment numbers and try to figure out, well, was it a 1-year deal? Was it a continuing problem that lingered into the next academic year? So with their help, we get to take on a big project, and I'm excited to get started with it.
But I just need to mention, it's not, for people who are listening, it's not just a big project. It's not just something that is fun to do as a journalist to dive into these numbers, but the reporting of this information and putting it into context is literally going to help when it comes to policy making at the higher ed level. And I'm quite sure that the university presidents and staff underneath them, they need this kind of reporting as much as anybody to try and figure out how to make sure that kids are going on after high school in Idaho and getting their post-secondary certificates or degrees and leaning into that most important education goal that everybody has seemed to agree with, but nobody can seem to get there.
I've said that this is a very important education issue for the state, and it really is. What happens with our higher education enrollment is crucial. But this is also a story that has national implications, because the national enrollment trends in higher ed, they definitely took a downturn with the pandemic for a variety of reasons: health concerns, economic issues, you name them. So what we're seeing in Idaho and what we see moving forward in Idaho, it's not just in a vacuum. It's not just our issue. It's an issue that has much broader implications. So that was part of how we made our proposal, and fortunately, the folks at EWA saw merit in it, and they're giving us some support. So we're going to get a chance to take a deep dive into this.
Well, I'm excited to have you come on Making the Grade and report your findings as you get them moving along. Kevin, we really appreciate everything you and the staff at Idaho Education News do each and every day to make sure we are informed. And I know there's a lot on your plate for the next couple of weeks. So hang in there, and I can't wait to talk to you next week on Making the Grade.
Will do. Stay safe, Michelle. Have a good week.